Well, I am happy to say that here in Florida, the Gators are keeping their distance from me. And I'm speaking, of course, not about the university, but actual reptiles. The reason I'm being beamed to you today is that I want you to share with me the launch of a new podcast called Stories from the Last 100 Years. Now, a lot of things happened in those 10 decades. You can take your pick. But before I start unplugging that dam, I'd like to just digress for a moment. Well, when you launch a new podcast, some background is necessary. My name, of course, is Calvin, but who is this Calvin? And by what authority does he start ripping stories from the skein of modern history and relating them to people he's never met before? Okay, well, the short bio on me is that I'm a guy who spent some time in academia in Washington, D.C., but then fled to the federal government. When I received my PhD in 1984, yes, ladies and gentlemen, that terrible year that, depending on your point of view, did or didn't happen. But when I received that sheepskin in 1984, I soon sort of navigated my way to the federal government and worked on international trade. Prior to that, I taught some undergraduate courses in, let me see, the history of Western intellectual thought and world politics, which what came in handy was having the doctorate and concentrating on Western Europe, what we used to call the Soviet Union, and international economics. But I imagine that's enough about me for the time being. So far, so good. Maybe I should touch a little bit on the medium that we're using for these stories to come to you. You may listen either to the audio alone, or you can get the visual effect and see my wonderful face every week. But I tend to like the audio approach. It seems to me that it not only allows you, but it encourages you to tap your imagination. You can fill in the plot, the characters, with your own pictures. You're not reliant on preset visual screens or frames that somebody else chose for you. But as I said, you're free to go ahead and choose your medium on that. We have a rich mother lode to tap in these last 100 years. What you find is that we're hurtling back and forth between very dramatic events, some of them long term, some of them just an immediate trigger for something. But think of it: the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War period, where you have the wrenching Vietnam War, but then you also have technological developments too, shifting later on to the digital age, or the neurotic fears we felt with the approach of the year 2000, thinking that all of our personal information was going to be destroyed. And more recently, an untechnological, well, partly technological, I guess, the fall of communism as well, which changed the face of things to some extent. Are the individuals and events that I relate to you here real, actual events that happen? Well, I can answer that with an unqualified yes. Unless I identify something as, a fantasy or hearsay, it's a straightforward account of things that I saw or other people witnessed, to the best of our knowledge. And I think you'll agree with me that in this day and age, when the very idea of truth or objective relaying of information has come under assault, a careful approach is something that's called for. Well, let me add one other thing. Don't be surprised if men and women who were born and reared abroad rather than the US pop up in these stories. Now, there are reasons for that, as there are for everything. Obviously, my busying myself for so many years with foreign affairs, what was going on abroad, has a lot to do with it. I mean, we're all top heavy with some experiences from subcultures or groups that we belong to. And sometimes the group is the entire nation that you live in. But also, and I know you've heard this little cliche ad nauseum, but that doesn't lessen its relevance for us. The world is getting smaller. And another thing, of course, is that the United States wasn't exactly staying at home during these years. All the more reason to reference interaction with foreign peoples, which I find a fascinating study in itself, or I wouldn't have logged in all those years in the laboratory. Let me also point out, in terms of the format of the stories, they're not in perfect chronological order. Now, a listener might ask, why are you going from, Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s to, the digital age, bouncing back to the atomic age when the first atomic bombs were exploded, and then forward again to the Watergate scandal? No, I can't say that I'm trying to replicate Quentin Tarantino's gyrating plot in Pulp Fiction. That was certainly an unchronological derby, if ever there was one. But more seriously, I think it does give you more of an opportunity to compare different historical periods and events. And if there's some spacing in terms of the number of years, all the better for a kind of long-term comparison or contrast of what we lived through. And I don't want to repeat myself too much, but these were extremely dramatic years. And going back to Alvin Toffler, whose book Future Shock created more than just a few ripples in the 1970s, when Toffler talked about not just change happening, but the actual pace of change escalating in the modern period. So perhaps, the imagination can latch a hold of, as I said, different periods and profit from that. So what else? You will notice in the narratives that are passed on to you that I begin each one, and I'm not going to let you forget, with announcing the tenure of the American president that coincides with the events that follow. Now, this might seem like a strange way of introducing a story, and I agree with you that when it comes to American presidents, sometimes thinking that they matter is like waiting for the Easter Bunny to approach. But on the other hand, there are those presidents who are closely identified with the era in which they were presiding. I mean, think about William McKinley in the 1890s, the Gilded Age, where there was concern about the powerful trust that existed in the United States, or Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s, the New Deal unleashed at a very desperate time, or more ominously, let's say, Lyndon Johnson and his Great Society, which collapsed under the weight of the Vietnam War. I think there are times when, just mentioning the president can sort of be a landmark so that you get the full flavor of the time. Well, maybe that's enough background. I don't want to intro you to death, so why don't I head on over to the very first story? One of my favorites and possibly yours. I imagine that you're ready for a couple. This one is known as Day of the Swedish Roughneck and dates to Jimmy Carter's term, 1978, AKA. I hope you're ready for a jaunt to Scandinavia for this. The town of Vänersborg, Sweden, felt like an early June baseball game. Nothing much is happening. Then you're treated to a flurry of hits, a wild pitch, stolen bases, or the mightiest of them all, a home run. But I watched the birds with a friend of mine named Janne, a tall Swede, that I met in Hamburg, and he was putting me up in his tiny government-subsidized apartment. Yanni had for me unusual credentials. His employment as a sergeant in a UN peacekeeping unit in the Sinai Desert singled him out from the mass of humanity. The third occupant of our little apartment was Amigo, a lengthy German shepherd. Very alert member of the team, I might add. Whatever the world's turmoil, the park that Yanni and I were leisurely sitting in was a place of peace. Soon, a lanky man with long red hair and an obvious limp approached. See that guy? Yanni deadpan. He stuck a knife in one of my friend's legs. So he goes to jail and brags about it. But then two of the prisoners think, wonder what will happen if we stick a knife in his leg. And they do it. That's why he walks so funny. Minutes later, we munched West Coast salad at a drive-in. The current rage in southern Sweden, it consisted of a hot dog in a bun, smothered in mashed potatoes, tartar sauce, peas, and optionally, ketchup. Not repulsive, even if the ketchup was overkill. After this foreplay, the parking lot filled up with old Chevys and Buicks. It's the Ragare. Loosely translated as rednecks, these young males greased their hair back and drove cars embossed with the American flag or eagle, while I, a breathing Yank, could only stand and gape. See the eagle on my car. Look, preened the guy in high boots. You come to my house. You stay as long as you want. Food, too. Ray had my arm. No, the man comes to my house. My Chevy, see? Damn right I do. Several car rides in souped up badass American cars followed. Yanni explained. These rednecks love anything that's American. It's like in Stockholm, communists were marching against the Vietnam War. But the Ragare came too. Man, they beat up those communists. Next day's topless sunbathing on the lake was anticlimactic. All right, ladies and gents, moving on from Nordic ice flows, isn't free association a wonderful thing? Our next, and for today, last nugget dates from 1960, the final year of Dwight David Eisenhower's presidency. It's not exactly a story with plots and characters. What follows instead is a helping of I think, memorable quotes from the famed French film director Jean-Luc Godard and his path-breaking film Breathless. Now, a footnote about Breathless. When it came to the theaters, critics in particular hailed it as a unbelievable breakthrough, path-breaking film that defined a new genre. I'll just say that Godard himself was a little less exhilarating about his description of what the movie represented. But why don't you try and judge a little yourself from these quotes? The charms of Godard's Breathless. You Americans like only the most stupid of Frenchmen. Lafayette, Chevalier. Why is it the French say it's all the same when it isn't? What is your greatest ambition? To become immortal, then die. Do you like Faulkner? Why? Who is he? Did you sleep with him? It's like poker. The truth is best. The others still think you're bluffing, so you win. Exit Monsieur Godard and Breathless, ladies and gentlemen, until we have use for him next time. This is Calvin, looking forward to joining you next week. Au revoir.